because this is on. I'm Jennifer Johnson.
Worksession-ZCO Consulting.
Robert Harris, CFO.
Mike Shattuck, internal audit.
All in favor?
Jim Steele, Subway.
Julia Tucker, Family Council.
Okay.
Family Budget Analyst.
Let's go.
Okay, so this is the monthly report from ZCO Consulting, or pretty similar outline. We'll talk about some activity information, the document review and approval process, some comments about the project staffing, the running cost, the overall project costs, and we'll continue with our project critical success factor conversation that we've had since November, and talk a little bit about the outlook. So in terms of the activity, there have been some changes at the upper level from an SAP perspective. There's a new engagement partner who is becoming more active. So he's involved now, and then we also have a new program manager. Blaine Wilkes has replaced Jim Curry. So there's some, and they are in the process of restructuring some of their project approaches and so forth, and the scope of the blueprint. So that kind of activity is going on right now. Jim Curry had moved some activities for a blueprint into realization, meaning it's into the next phase, and now that's being moved back. So the engagement partner wants to include that stuff to make sure that the blueprint is complete. Tech and HANA, all that activity that SAP is preparing to make sure that there's a platform in place on 3.1 is slightly ahead of schedule, doing well. So that's working out fine. I think the feedback from several members of the consulting team is that they're becoming frustrated by the impreciseness of going forward. So there's a lot of question right now, a lot of analysis and examinations and a lot of meetings, and it's not clear to the actual consultants as to whether or not they're going to have work on 3.1. So it's entirely possible that they will start looking for work early in February, and that could cause some issues. The non-decision, enterprise content management came up, several months ago as to whether or not that should be included in the scope. That has been pushed and deferred, and in essence, the non-decision has put it in a situation where it's pretty much going to be impossible for the team to do any design work for ECM before 2/29. I think it's important to note that in this week's PMO meeting, that 226 report, they basically indicated that the project was in a red status. That's concerning. So I think, but it also means that the team recognizes and understands some of the issues that are there, and so definitely some work needs to be done to address the fact that probably the project's not going to finish on 2/29 as they had projected. I mentioned to you earlier that some of the blueprint activities for organization change management had been pushed in order to make it easier to complete on 2/29. Those have now been moved back, and the examples of very specific examples of these additional activities are listed there. I think the important thing to note here is that there really are no resources to work on that other than the OCM manager. And that OCM manager has made it very clear that his status now has become red, and that he doesn't have enough bandwidth, he doesn't think, to actually finish that by 2/29. So some observations, and these are, in some cases are similar to what has been said for the last couple of months. The white paper approach at the executive team, has requested for, if you recall, there were about 9 major decisions that needed to be made. This was almost 4 months ago. Very few of those have been made. The white paper approach pretty inefficient in terms of requiring the team to come up with all kinds of pros and cons and detailed analyses, and still not come to a conclusion as to whether or not it's in scope. The sign-off process was pretty inconsistent. I think there's been a lot of effort by the team and working with the BPOs to get that process organized so that it does work. I think they've made some headway there, but it still continues to lag significantly and is slowing down the overall completion capabilities, and we'll see that a little bit more. Project governance is becoming very confusing. We have all these new SAP representatives at upper levels. They are getting involved, and then there are some additional there's an independent consultant who is not a member of the Synergy team, but he's also involved, and there seems to be quite a bit of confusion as to what that person's role is, responsibilities, duties, accountabilities, and so forth. So there's some consternation in terms of how Synergy is being managed and governed. Okay, let's talk about the review and approval process. These are some statistics that have come from the team. I kind of, what the team is doing is they're listing all of the various areas in terms of what the total documents are, how many documents have been signed, meaning that they're approved, how many documents are in review, and then, I added the total documents to sign because the team has kind of combined the review and approval, which is the signature, into one column, and I thought it would make some sense to make sure we understood that that's a separate step type of thing, okay? And that's also a potential bottleneck. So what's been happening here, I've listed them all for you. I'll just talk about this first one, and then we'll just pass through the remaining details. But this first one shows you, all right, accounts payable is a component of the system. There are 64 design documents in total that are supposed to be worked, okay? Total number that have been signed as of 1/21 or 1/26 is 10. You with me? Okay? If you sit there, you say, okay, so over the last 7 days, you'll notice that the team is tracking this in Tuesdays and Thursdays of every week. So you basically have 2-day intervals except for the weekends. So that, in essence, those 3 columns represent 7 days. That's 1 week. So the accounts payable folks were able to actually get 10 of those 64 signed. And that means from the beginning of the week to the end of the week, they actually had a change of an increase of 9. That's good. They did something. But now take a look at what's left. Take a look at what's left. If I take the 9 and subtract that from the 64, that's what's left. I've only got 3 weeks. And the reason I mentioned 3 weeks is that the team recognizes that since we have to have about a week after the blueprint has finally been agreed upon in detail, we have to have a week to do an awful lot of overall summary executive type review and approval activities. Ergo, it's not 2/29, it's 2/22 is the drop dead date for these documents. So if you're sitting there and saying, and that's 3 weeks from now, counting next week, it's 3 weeks. So if I say there's 3 weeks, then that means and then you sit there and say, well, wait a minute, that's why I was talking about the signature piece. If I've got some folks doing the review, basically the process is I now need to pass it on to somebody to approve. So I have to have some of that stuff done before the 2/22 in order to give that person the signatory time to do it. So for estimating purposes, I said, okay, the review work is over the next 2 weeks. The signatory work is over the next 3 weeks, taking me to 2/22. So that's how I'm getting those numbers.
So just for clarification, of those total documents, at this point, 64 are completed?
No, 64 in total need to be done.
Need to be done. So, and then documents to be signed, those are ones that are completed.
That are signed are completed. So out of the 64, realizing that this business started back in September.
Right.
Okay, accounts payable has got 10 of those 64 signed off.
And we don't know the other 54 at what stage they're at.
Well, they are in review, total documents to review.
So they have been written.
They have been developed. Oh, as far as development work,
Okay.
When you look at the 1,000 documents, round numbers,
Right.
virtually all of those are done.
Okay.
In other words, the consultants have done their job.
Okay, that's my question.
Yeah,
That was,
oh,
I wanted
yeah.
to make sure.
The bulk of all this is now the MOA staff need to read, review, adjust, change, comment, whatever is necessary, and then they need to pass them on to the approver.
Okay.
Does the person reviewing have the, can they put it back to say, no, this isn't complete? You put
Sure,
it
that's
back?
going on.
And it seems to me the person signing is gonna be reviewing as well, because they're not gonna sign it if they don't look at it and understand it. So you've got,
No argument there, but the bottleneck right now is that there are some folks who are basically saying, I'm waiting, I'm not looking at that stuff until I know that my staff
as approved.
have finished all this and told me everything's okay. Okay, so there's a bottleneck there.
So the bottom line is that we're trying to do too much in that period of time.
That
You're
maybe
not gonna get it done. Not only that.
Or we don't have enough
The
resources.
people that are doing the reviewing are, here's an example. Just saw a memo, just saw an email that was issued this morning, okay, by the Accounts Receivable Department. Accounts Receivable Department has made a statement that we're not going to issue invoices during the month of February because we need to spend our time on this. Because it's short of resources.
Yeah.
Okay?
And plus they're trying to close out books.
Yeah, and that's gone on too. So, now, whether or not people are working over the next few weeks, all weekend long, I don't know. My understanding is that the approvals are there, that people can. You know, I mean, I would think that working over the weekend might be a better solution than not issuing invoices.
And you're telling me that the contractors are ahead of the game such that, and they may have,
The
they may have to
contractors,
stay longer or.
yeah, but the contractors are in pretty good shape. They've done most of their work. They're in pretty good shape. There's not a lot left for them to do on this piece.
They're just standing around waiting for the questions.
But they're sitting there having to go and sit down with people and saying, okay, let's walk through this, let's talk about it, you know, I'll answer your questions, I'll make some changes. That kind of thing is going on, hopefully. I mean, I don't know the specifics as to whether or not that is, but that's probably the best way to get any of this done. Now, mind you, though, the story that you see up there is something actually got done in accounts payable.
Yeah.
Look at assets management, all right? Zero approvals have been done in the last week, okay? Look at general ledger. Zero approvals have been done in the last week. And then you look at what's left to do, and you say, oh, for the next two weeks, somebody in general ledger has to review 23 documents. And then, oh, by the way, that person's boss in general ledger, over the next 3 weeks, has to average 16 documents. That doesn't sound so bad until you realize that, you know, that entire list up there, it's the same person. There's the bottleneck.
Well, and if they have a question, they refer it back and you get around the problem.
There you go. It goes on and on and on. Okay, so I'm just trying to, so general ledger and asset management document review and approval has made no progress in the past week. Accounts payable approved 9 documents in the past week, but must be on a 27 per week pace to finish by 2/22. Okay, so here's the next one. Here's receivables, no progress. Grants management, very little progress. Got 2 done, and all of them. And again, the problem when you get to the signatory, you got one person sitting there.
And, I mean, we were almost done with bylaws last year, I
Yeah.
wanted to say.
Oh, yeah.
Many
Oh, yeah.
times, and one of the things that was holding it up was the grant management, so those documentation we got.
The documents have been developed.
So-
They're now, there's 30 of them that are waiting to be reviewed.
Which was, I mean, seriously, that was the last thing, otherwise Philo could have done, yeah.
Well, I mean, and there is a grants management consultant that they brought in. Work's been done.
Is it getting people up to speed? Is that the issue? I mean, is the issue that the reviewers need to know a little more about? what's going on?
It's a combination of things, okay? You've had some turnover, so you've had some loss of people, okay? So that's been an issue. You've got the whole issue of closing the books, I mean, so that's pulling people. On an every 2-week basis, you're pulling the payroll people back in to do payroll. These are the exact same problems that you had
We've been
3
through
years
that.
ago and 2 years ago. I mean,
It's resources.
it's the allocation of the resources,
Yeah.
which is why, I have continually said, okay, it's wonderful that we have a staffing plan for the consultants. Why don't we have a staffing plan for the MOA staff? Everybody knew that the accounting folks would not be available very much January and February. I mean, everybody knew this.
December, January.
Well, you say, yeah, I mean, everybody knew this. It's still, we're here. I mean, it's happening again.
It is what it is, and we have the resources we have, and so.
But yeah, but if you
I'm
do
sure
that,
these guys have
if you do that, you can create mitigating actions, right? You can figure out mitigating actions. I mean, if you know you're gonna lose somebody, you can get back up, but you gotta get it early enough so that they can learn and so forth, so they can be a resource of value. So those things just simply have not.
Dealing with their contractors, you just say, hey, bring some more resources up here, but.
That's right, that's right.
But dealing with our people,
But this was all on the white paper,
I know.
all of this.
Okay, so these are all, they're in your document. I don't think there's any need to go through, but you can just see what the results are and what they have to do and so forth. So I mean, that information's there. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about RISEP. We mentioned this months ago, and it's a term, it's an SAP term, but you need to make sure that it doesn't get overlooked. All right? So the documents we've been talking about, are the design documents for finance and for HCM. But we've got to recognize that there are some other documents, some additional documents that are part of this whole process that is also quite large with an awful lot of detail. And so we need to sit there and recognize that what RISEP means is you're supposed to document your workflows, that's the W. You're supposed to document and design the reports that you need, that's the R. You're supposed to design and identify the interfaces that you're going to have. You're supposed to design and define all the conversions you're going to have, all the enhancements to the project, to the system, and then what forms, like a paycheck is a form, okay? All that has to be designed. So those all end up being documents. Okay, I just want to let you know that, three of the 6 are probably in pretty decent shape. But I think we need to recognize that, you will hear conversations and discussions about whether or not the business warehouse and the business objects decision, whether or not that needs to be included in the scope of this project. Well, that generates your reports. I'm not sure I understand why that's an issue. I don't understand that, but I'm just saying it is. I mean, because it costs money. The other irony about this is business warehouse and business objects has already been purchased. The community owns it already. What's happening is people are questioning whether or not we want to spend time and money on the consultants to work on it. That's the question. It's not a matter of whether or not you got to buy it. And if you don't do it, we've got all kinds of kludgy solutions on how you're going to get reports out of the system. Okay, interfaces. A lot of talk about, do we need all these interfaces to be automated? And that's a way of reducing cost. Okay? I'm just a little nervous about that. It's pretty important that you have most of the interfaces in place, especially, and the other thing I think we should recognize is most of those interfaces are already defined. I looked at the work plan, I mean, the definition is 100% complete, according to the work plan. So why would we want to say, well, I really don't know if we want to spend the time to install that or implement that particular interface?
It's just the programming,
Yeah, it's the people time.
just building.
Yeah, it's people time. I mean, it's designed, so but now you get the actual development time. And conversions, same thing. There's some questions about whether or not we want to convert all of our data. How many times have we had this conversation in here about whether or not we should do project to date data? I mean, how many times is it? That's been going on since February of 2014, I think, of making a decision on whether or not you're going to bring project to date data over. Well, it was decided back in, I think, November. It was a white paper, it went to the executive group, and it was decided, and the team said, this is the way we're gonna do it. Well, now it's being questioned again. Because it's gonna take time, no matter what, to actually, literally, you're gonna have people working on it. And then it becomes a line item that you could potentially reduce.
So with the administration, are you trying to decide whether you're gonna do that or if you're gonna do a snapshot? I mean, what's?
No, I mean, I just think right now, the functional steering committee is literally going through all the various different conversions of the data and saying, do we need to convert it or not convert it? I mean, they're asking the question again,
Yeah,
okay? Because it takes money to do
Yeah.
that.
We got a new contractor, we got new people, we got a new administration. It's a perfect place, a new fiscal year, a perfect place to start from.
So one of the things that was presented in the functional steering committee meeting last week is, hey, what do we need to do to sign off and finish the blueprint? In other words, that's, SAP refers to that as sort of the blueprint exit activities. Well, this is some page out of that presentation, and I think it's, the thing we need to recognize is that this business of, well, gee, we have to do some kind of an acceptance of the detailed design, and there are multiple ways of doing it, and here's a description of the multiple ways of doing it. But that's about as much as the description has. I mean, so we don't know how much effort is going to have to go into that. I mean, it could be as much, it could be several weeks. I mean, and all of a sudden we're saying, oh, well, when are you going to do that if it's several weeks? If you're running all the review and approval of the documents up until 2/22, you've only got a week left to get it done. My take is, got to be careful that you might end up doing some kind of a proof of concept, which would require actually running the system. And if that's the case, then you're into March. So the competition for MOA resources, no surprise, we've already discussed this. Will make it, at least in my opinion, will make it virtually impossible to complete the blueprint by 2/29. There's a possibility. Now we saw one mitigating approach, which is, gee, we're not going to issue invoices, okay? But another one could be, let's just abrogate all of our responsibilities. Let's just basically assume everything's okay because the consultants did it, and we're just going to say it's signed. That's not a good idea either, okay? We need to be careful not to fall into that trap.
I don't know, at this point, I'm ready for that.
Well,
I've just been down this road so many times.
but then how do you hold anybody accountable? That's the whole part.
Exactly. I mean, you gotta have you gotta have the review and approval. I mean, no question it has to happen. I just think that there's just not enough time left to get it done, given the resources and given the bottlenecks and all that kind of thing. I mean, and you're adding activities back into Blueprint that were not there. That's the third bullet. We've already talked about that, and as well as the and I'm repeating myself, I think, in the last point, other than to say, I think you probably can get this thing done by the end of March. That one I think does work. So let's talk a little bit about staffing. I've talked about the fact that there's a new program manager. Everybody was real excited with Jim Curry because Jim Curry is on the West Coast. He could get up here, and he also made the commitment to actually be here every week. I thought that was pretty good. We need to recognize that this person's from Connecticut. So this starts sounding an awful lot like Tom Dale, who was here before, and we immediately got into travel issues, family issues, and all the other kind of things regarding him. So you need to realize that the new program manager from SAP now has the same travel challenges that you had before. Okay, you have the new OCM PM and the senior PM for Philo has been replaced. And I mentioned the fact that there is now a new engagement leader change at the SAP level, and project scheduler has started. So that's good news. So that helps. We have some changes that I'm kind of viewing or thinking of as being the surrounding staff changes. There's a new CIO, or Director of IT, which is the official title.
Let's, Director of IT, but, you know,
Okay.
CIO is, kind of captures that idea.
Okay. So, there's a new one, and I've talked to him, I mean, he's around, but I haven't seen him or heard him in some of the meetings within the last week, so I don't know, I don't know what his, the question is, what's his role and how does he fit in? I mean, you know, I think it needs to be done. You know, we need to recognize that the interim CIO who was here before has moved back to AWU, and I think it's important to recognize that that individual represents the main IT continuity on this synergy project. So, don't know how that fits, whether or not that's gonna continue or how he's gonna be involved with the synergy project going forward, don't know. I think it should be resolved. And then we have this, the special consultant's been inserted into the project activity, I think I mentioned that. His name is John Marcinko. So the question here is roles, responsibilities, accountability of the project is confusing and unclear to the project team. So, I've shown you this before, this is from the team, it's kind of like their staffing outlook for contractors. And, you know, you can see it's grouped by various project teams. The yellow is, the approximation of what's here now. The red is what they expect to be using as you go forward. So this is not over the next 2 months, but over the next 18 months. You just gotta get a feel for the relative size of the teams. Notice that there's nobody, at the time that this was done, there was nobody on time management. I know that's being addressed. With regards.
Is this an older slide?
Yeah, it's a couple weeks old. So I know there's a time person now. The OCM team, there's only one person in OCM, and that person is very interested in getting 2 more team leads that should be on board now as far as that person's concerned. And then data migration, you know, there really isn't anybody focusing on data migration. So, and I think that's current, isn't it? That's a current statement. Alden, okay.
We've decided not to migrate all that stuff over.
But you still have to have people working on, what needs to move.
They gotta design it.
They gotta.
Yeah, this is not the developers, this is somebody's gonna literally lay out all the design work, okay? You know, in essence, that most of the people are, you know, in fact, I think Alden reported 2 weeks ago that, you know, everybody that's supposed to be on board are on board as far as contractors are concerned, and it took a while because the pause really caused an issue.
And that ties back to your burn rate that you're gonna talk about here in a few slides.
Yep.
The cost is going up is because you.
You're full staff now, that's
Well,
right.
So
But
it's
I-
a month behind schedule.
So I want to show you, but I do want to highlight this last line, and I've mentioned it once and I'll say it again. A few weeks ago, I said should have a similar staffing plan for MOA employees. We should know how many people we need, when and where, and what kind of people. Should have that information. Well, I've suggested that we need to take the word should out and it really needs to say must.
Yeah.
I cannot understand why we don't lay out what we need from MOA and then get it committed and then go forward. Rather than continually saying, I can't do it.
Right.
And this will be the 3rd time now that mistake has been made.
Yeah, and so I think I asked you this last week not from this report, but from others. Do we have a functional steering committee now, and do we have an executive?
Yes, and I'll take this one. I interpreted your question to be about IT.
It was all about IT, but
Yes.
then now I'm asking for this.
Oh, yes, so we have a functional steering committee and an executive steering committee for the SAP project and all that, all the time.
The functionals meeting weekly, and the executive steering committee's meeting weekly, but, there are occasional weeks where we meet even more than that. In fact, they're both of them scheduled starting at 1:30, right after this particular meeting today.
And,
And we're mainly focusing on the blueprint issues, trying to push that through, as well as the SAP contract and negotiations and scope of work and all those kind of things. So they are meeting, and the functionals talking about the data conversion, data migration issues as well.
and then, well, we don't see here yet, but we keep seeing, and the project champion is, have you hired? or do you-
There is no, change champion from the executive team that's been identified. I think that's, you refer to it as change champion.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, but there's not one that's been identified.
Okay, so just, we mentioned running costs. Here is the chart that basically we try to present on a weekly basis. It's the contractor run rate. We started it back in, before the pause, so we knew what the situation was before the pause. So before the pause, we had about 40 contractors, and our run rate was about 150,000 per week. Now, we have fewer contractors, closer to 30. I think 32 might be the exact number. But the run rate is now greater than 300,000 a week. The last 2 weeks, it's been over 300,000.
Because they're doing twice the work.
Because you are now at pretty close to full staffing, and they all happen to be, well, many of them happen to be SAP contractors, which are much more expensive than the Peloton contractors. That's the reason. Okay? So if you want to sit there and say, if you sit there and ask yourself, you know, the likelihood for the next two months is that the run rate will be at that number, give or take. Okay? If you extend into March, then obviously you can multiply by the number of weeks in March and multiply by 300,000, and that gives you kind of what the overrun will be for Blueprint.
So I have a question for the administration. With the white paper last summer or fall, for the, it was suggested that we go into a full project management, SAP, contracted price, where they,
You want a fixed price,
Fixed contracted
with
price.
SAP being the neck to choke, so to speak, fully responsible, taking
Right.
charge, that kind of stuff.
And
That was from
when,
external committees, what you're referring
and I had a brief conversation with the mayor over the holidays, and he said some of the things I'm seeing here is because the administration is still in, negotiations with SAP. Are we doing a full contract price, or are we doing cost plus? What are we doing?
I think it's too early to answer that particular question. I would expect hopefully by the end of next week, we will have scope determined. And then at that point, we'll begin negotiations with SAP. So I think the current process is looking at time and material, which is what's been brought up. Because with fixed price, the expectation is that if that's the case, they're gonna come forward with probably a 20% markup
Mhm.
on that, and price and cost has been, is a concern, and
And
we're,
who's- yeah, I
when we
mean,
get to that particular point, it's not that it's out of the, it's not that it hasn't been excluded yet, and that's certainly, I don't think we've really even engaged SAP in a real protracted, contract discussion. I know they're prepping right now with a variety of different things, but we haven't, we're still, I think, in the process of just trying to decide what the scope of the project is going to be. And then once that's determined, then we'll begin with the full negotiations with SAP. But I'm not saying a fixed price is out of the question. I mean, it certainly could happen. I don't know what price, might be attached to that, and how much from a negotiating strategy we might be able to mitigate some of those things. We really haven't got into the discussion heavily with SAP at this point, but that, we are certainly pursuing SAP as our first choice of trying to get them to be the implementer.
I have to say, I'm worried, I'm concerned about defining the scope, only because we have a history, and, I've always said, let's be careful going for perfect. And I hope as you're defining that scope, you're doing it with an eye to cost, we should be seeing a lot of these weekly rates, some adjustment into, do both.
And resources, we're gonna have to make a
Right.
commitment on our
I mean,
side.
I hope, we don't see huge scope increases.
I think it's the exact opposite. I think that the scope is only gonna be how much can we decrease this. I'm not anticipating any scope increases. What I'm anticipating is, are there areas where we can reduce scope to either save time, energy costs, and those.
I mean,
kinds of
we were
things.
at a point where, as I say, it wasn't perfect, but Philo, I'm still convinced that Philo was almost done. And one of the problems is that we, the utilities wanted to have the FERC added and the scope increased. And I just hope as you're looking at this, that you're looking at getting something done, and then we can go on to whatever we need to expand for others.
For the FILO and HCM, I don't believe there's been any scope increases, and I don't believe that there's gonna be any decreases in those areas. There are some ancillary things, ECMs, they have brought up multiple
Yeah,
times here.
and
That's the potential one that's on
Right.
the table. So I think it's those other ancillary areas that are being reviewed for efficiency, need, and those kind of things. No one is going through and getting rid of FILO or HCM, and no one's really going through and expanding the scope of those particular areas as well, because we know we need to get the product turned on and we'll worry about the extras after.
Shall I continue?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so here's some commentary about the weekly run rate. We do have an increase, and this is the 20% increase over the week before the holidays, and that's the whole full contractor staffing statement. The costs now per hour is about $240. Expenses are running about $35,000 a week. 75% of the contractors are traveling. Okay. Project cost. In November and December, or in November, I presented the total project cost, and so I now have the December numbers. So you see the December numbers there, and then the team about 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago generated a projection of what it's going to take to finish. So that's their projection. So you take that projection, you add it to the 12/31 numbers, and you end up with about a $45 million number for Blueprint based on that projection. The concern that I have is maybe low, okay? When I say that, I mean, it's because all of a sudden, we're looking at, over $300,000 a week for the contractors instead of $250. So that's a noticeable jump, and so I don't know if that projection included such increases. Okay, so we need to be aware that if that's low, then it's entirely possible, and if you go into March, entirely possible that 45 million is going to be low, and then literally you're going to need a little bit more just to get to finish the Blueprint. Okay, so we started talking about critical success factors in November. We talked about a change champion as being a critical success factor in the November report. We talked about using a systems integrator for the project as being a critical success factor. And in December, we talked about the need for improved communication as being the third one, and then the fourth one, to watch out for opening Pandora's box and go back and start redoing and reanalyzing and reconsidering design decisions, which is the famous analysis paralysis thing. So what's kind of our condition on those 4 items? We still don't have a change champion. I think Alden just mentioned that. It does appear that if you're talking about a time and materials contract with SAP, they're not going to be a systems integrator. With time and materials, you don't take responsibilities. You don't accept them. You don't manage other contractors. You don't manage target dates. I mean, you just provide hours. Communications, so we just got to be careful. I mean, I think some effort's been made by the new OCM manager, project manager, to establish, a beginning point for communications, which is good. I mean, in other words, the SharePoint site is up, and I believe it's actually going to.
I just got an actual email while I was sitting here. They just put it out. I think February 1st is going.
Cool. So I mean, that's good. That's good stuff. The thing we got to be careful of is when you start talking about shaving cost, communications becomes a target. So does training. I mean, so we got to be careful. It is a critical success factor to have good communications. This goes all the way back to when, if you'll recall, I did a survey in January a year ago. Okay, and we found out that the communications were horrible. People in the muni didn't know what was going on. They were very frustrated. So, case in point. And then the whole critical success factor says you've got to implement a stationary target. You got to finish Blueprint, and that's what you're going to implement. Okay, and we've already had people in functional steering committee saying, well, gee, I want to make sure we have the ability to make changes after we finish blueprint. I'm going, great, that's all we need is a moving target. You know, I mean, so hopefully we will try to control that.
In the administration's defense, as they get up to speed on it, they could be more efficient. I mean, unfortunately, we changed administration, or fortunately, it's the case with me, changed administration right there at that critical time.
You bet. Okay, so critical success factor 5 is you really ought to prevent the repeating of history. So MOA's history of project failure. MOA did an awful lot of cutting of corners to complete their design a few years ago. They did an awful lot of cutting of corners in testing and data conversion a year ago. Okay, continually a failure to commit internal resources, and continually a failure to address the resource needs for continuing your operation. MOA became the systems integrator, managing multiple contracts, and if you recall, we had all kinds of problems a year ago with multiple contracts, inconsistent contracts, I mean, overruns, I mean, all of the things that, because, you know, the Muni is not necessarily an experienced systems integrator. And failure to implement a purchased product. That is an example of a failure in the past. The one specifically is people saw budget. Well, you also purchased some products here that you're talking about not implementing, okay? So we just need to avoid those kinds of historical mistakes. And that's the critical success factor. Let's talk a little bit about carving the SAP proposal. How'd you like my turkey? Was that okay? The proposal's been provided by SAP. It's been presented to the executive team. Based on a variety of different presentations in the PMO meetings and the functional steering committee meetings, I have learned of a few things in terms of their objectives regarding the reduction of the overall budget, okay, for this project. And so what are some of the things that are being considered? All right, eliminating the fixed fee premium, Alden just talked about that. And yes, it probably would be 20 to 25%. It's a big nut to crack. But that's what, you know, an organization like SAP wants in exchange for accepting the risk. So selectively eliminating some functionality, shortening certain selected implementation activities such as testing and conversion. Actually make those timelines a little shorter. This is all based on the proposed SAP timeline of 59 weeks. Okay. Eliminating the use of the business warehouse, which is the reporting thing we talked about. Eliminating the use of enterprise content management, and also even reducing some training resources that SAP has estimated for organization change management. Those are examples of some of the potential changes that the functional steering committee is taking on, and starting last week, they're going to do it this week. I don't know about next week, but okay, so this week might be the last one.
Actually, it was 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago, okay.
And last week, they kind of weighed in on it, so.
So the executive team has requested the functional steering committee for recommendations regarding potential ways of reducing cost of the SAP proposal. I think it's important to note that some of these things are very familiar, should be familiar, because we talked over the last few months about multiple decisions that needed to be made that had to do with scope of effort, and now, of course, they're being considered again. So this was actually presented to the functional steering committee, so I used it, and it is a listing of the various components that have been priced by SAP. So there's a pricing line item, whatever it may be, associated with each one of those. Notice that I've said, okay, the first three appear to be given, and I think Alden already said that, you know, Philo and HCM, I mean, that's all there. But when we get down the bottom part of the list, all of a sudden we get into, should we or should we not do this and pay SAP for it? Right? Because there's a price for every one of those. But you'll notice in what is circled, I don't know what those bars are, I apologize for that, but what is circled are those familiar items that we've talked about and listened and heard about for the last few months. I mean, ECM, PMO, OCM, business warehouse, and even basis, which is the programming language, that's staff to do the actual programming, and security, I mean, are also line items that are in play. Okay? So, some detail with regard to critical success factor number 5, which is, please don't repeat what you've done before if it was a mistake. All right? Learn from the lessons, right? So what are the things that we should do? We should avoid cutting corners for the sake of budget. It's okay to cut something out, but don't cut a corner. Avoid deferring important functional capabilities for the sake of budget. Okay? Avoid slimming down test cycles for the sake of budget. Historically, 18 months ago, tremendous amount of testing was going on, and it kept getting repeated, and kept getting repeated, and it took much longer than anybody thought it was going to take. So why in the world would we want to sit back and say, oh, we can do it in less time this time around? The history is it's not going to happen. Right? It will take time to do all the test cycles. And the recommendations are from SAP, who presumably know what they're doing. Okay? Avoid reducing data to be converted for the sake of budget. If you do that, and if you don't do the full conversion of the data that you need to have, you will find yourself kludging a solution. You will find yourself going back to legacy systems, keeping them alive, maintaining data in a dead system. Doesn't make sense. Okay? Avoid using less expensive contract labor for the sake of budget unless the skills and experience match the more expensive contract labor. I guess that's me saying, you know, if you're going to replace an SAP contractor, the person you replace them with better know what they're doing. Okay? You don't want to replace them just because they're cheaper. Ensure the participation of MOA internal staff. I mean, we've said this. This is the third time now that you're actually repeating that error again. Avoid increasing the project's risk for failure. Ensure that SAP takes implementation success responsibility. I would hope that the administration will negotiate a fixed fee contract with SAP and ask them to take on the responsibility for the successful result of this project. And if you've got to pay a little more for it, it's probably money well spent at this point in time. Clarify executive governance, provide a visible change champion. I guess I'm going to beat on that every month, right? So we need to recognize and look at what the impact of some of those carve-outs are. I mean, the fixed fee premium, I think I've already talked about that. If you go all time and materials, you're not going to have deliverables guarantees, you're not going to have any of that stuff. If you don't use ECM, and the team has already recommended that it should be included, you're going to continue handling documents in the same manner. So all manual documents floating around this organization will continue to be done exactly that way. Filing cabinets, all that kind of stuff will continue. No business warehouse, business object report writing. All of a sudden, you're going to be relying on queries. You're not going to get necessarily reports for financials out of SAP without custom programming, using basis. I mean, there's a variety of ugly things that can happen if you don't take advantage of a tool that you already own. It's a tool you already own. Okay? If you reduce the OCM staffing, you're going to start getting pushback. I mean, and there are a lot of changes that the new SAP system is going to represent in the store. It's going to happen, and you're going to have pushback. You're going to have people that don't like it. It's going to happen. There's no question it's going to happen. And an example might be, I think that the department ID has been at field and has been used by the community for at least, 20 years? Probably. It's changed. Okay, it's changed. It's called cost center. Well, I mean, that's only one example, but all I'm saying is that kind of stuff, you need to prepare people for that. Critical success factor number 6, establish clear and concise governance. I would suggest to you that these are a lot of questions that I think you should address. How does the consultant reporting to the CFO fit into the synergy project in terms of responsibilities, role, authority, and accountability? People just simply need to know. And when I talk with various members of the project team, they don't know. They're confused. They don't understand what that person is doing, and what their role is going to be or is. Who does the program sponsor report to? Once and for all, let's make it public. Let's make sure everybody understands who Alden reports to. Who does SAP report to? Alden is not negotiating the contract. Is SAP going to report to Alden? Needs to be clear. What are the responsibilities, roles, authorities, and accountability of each SAP project executive/leader? I think it's a little confusing right now. And we have an SAP partner standing up in meetings and all of a sudden making statements. And they're not coming from the program manager, they're not coming from the program sponsor. At the all hands meeting about a month ago, I was listening to people being very confused. So who's this person? Let's be clear. What's the relationship of the new CIO of the project? Okay, we got a new CIO, that's Director of IT. I apologize for that. So what's the relationship of that individual to the project? Should that individual be sitting in on the PMO meetings? Should that individual be sitting in on the functional steering committee meetings? Don't know. We ought to know. What's the role, responsibilities, authority, and accountability of the deputy CIO assigned to the Synergy project? Let's clarify once and for all what Kim's supposed to be doing. I said that because you're here. Who does the Peloton account executive report to? Remember I said earlier, if SAP does not take on responsibilities as systems integrator, you've got a pretty large portion of the overall contractor team is Peloton. Okay? Is SAP going to take responsibility for Peloton's activities over the next 18 months? Needs to be clear. And I think it needs to be included in the SAP contract. Whatever it is. Okay? Who is accountable for the effort of the other contractors working in the project? Just said that. Just happen to use Peloton as an example. If SAP is the system integrator, will they have accountability for other non-SAP contractors working on the project? You've got, today, right now, you have 5 contract organizations working on this project. You used to have a lot more than that, but you still have 5. So this came up, I think in, it was presented a few weeks ago, or a month ago, and this kind of shows you the outline in SAP's projection of what the project should look like. So the thing is, the thing that I wanted to show you, okay, the dark blue is the beginning of development. That's the beginning of realization. Okay, and that's when you start doing all of your configuration work and all that kind of thing, and that's the date when Heck and HANA need to be online and available, and that's obviously the day right after 229, which is when Blueprint is to be finished. Okay. And SAP basically lays that out and they say, okay, that's 59 weeks until we get to July of 2017. Okay? So what kind of impacts would happen if Blueprint doesn't make it? So delaying the realization can mean the loss of SAP knowledgeable consultants as early as mid-February. I was telling you earlier that some of those contractors are getting nervous. If they don't have work, if they don't see work here, they're going to look elsewhere. And some of them are quite good, quite knowledgeable. It will be easy for them to find another SAP project. No, do they wanna stay here? Sure they do. But they need to know. If you extend blueprint, you're given all the contracts and time materials, you gotta recognize that if you extend this thing and it goes to into March, then I would say you're gonna look at another $1.2 million for contractors, because that's $300,000 times 4. That's the weekly run rate. Delaying decisions on major scope issues, and again, I'm suggesting no decision is a decision, could lead to stretching that blueprint timeline and or other, or even giving an unintended pause. Okay? Delaying the start of realization will likely lead to at least an increase of 1 quarter to the end date. It's entirely possible because of payroll and federal tax reporting needs which are typically supposed to occur on a quarter, that if you miss a month, you can push it back in by a quarter. Okay? And I think it's important that whoever the systems integrator is, to answer that question. So the outlook, you're faced with 59 weeks, that's the SAP projection, all right? The target date of 3/1/16 may now face a delay because, you're adding some stuff that had been removed from blueprint, and your review and approval is dragging out, and it's not maintaining pace, okay? However, it is important to recognize that you can start right away, right after blueprint, which is the information that the contractors want. They need to know that. If everything is approved on schedule, if the software and the infrastructure is in place and ready to go, which is ahead of schedule, that's gonna be fine. And the contractors have contracts, because you got 5 contract organizations. Some of them go beyond 3/1, but I don't think SAP does. That's the big one. I'm not sure about Peloton. So the MOA financial team is faced with significant time demands, and we've talked about this, and that's going to cause an issue of not being able to get all this work done. Mitigation activity must be planned immediately to assure the resources will be available to finish R&A activities. I hope that the mitigation activities are not activities that we heard about that one example where let's just not issue invoices. That doesn't strike me as being the right mitigating activity. This came out from the PMO. This is the overall status document from the PMO. And a couple of key things. One, notice that the overall program status is red. That is what the team has reported at this point in time.
And it's red because of the file.
Absolutely.
That's the driving factor.
It's exactly, because up above, you see the FILO team is the one that's having the issues of getting everything reviewed and approved. Okay? However, we do need to recognize that the OCM person, the OCM senior manager said he's gonna change his to red too. Okay?
If he's expected to do all the
If he can't get it all done. Okay? So what does all this mean? I'm suggesting that you probably are looking at a 4/4/16 start for realization. But I do think that, gotta find out from SAP, because as soon as you see that arrow up there, as soon as you push that arrow and you say, oh, okay, I've just eaten up 1 month of my 59 weeks. All right, so what happens to the back end? And, can compression occur? And if you're gonna have a systems integrator taking on responsibility, then that's something that SAP should answer. Absolutely. Questions?
Wish we hadn't been here before. Just to the administration, and this is just me talking as an assembly person, but I think it's, and I didn't vote, I didn't wanna have ZIG on board to begin with. I voted
Gee,
against
thanks.
it. I know. Because it is an this ERP should be the job of the administration. And all the assembly should be doing is appropriating funds. But because we have this now beautiful history we have, it's changed some. And I really think, I've seen now, the last 3 months reports, again, with red flags coming. And I don't know how much the assembly reads this, I do, and, I think personally, I probably am gonna ask for some kind of report back to me, if not to the whole committee, on some of these issues within the next 2 weeks. If there's a chance that, I mean, I know that you're having some meetings this week and next, hopefully you'll have some, you'll be able to, give us it gives you 2 weeks to come up with some of the answers that you're working on, you're in the middle of now. So I wouldn't say, get back to me tomorrow, but I think we really need to address some of these concerns, especially because just to get over the blueprint, we're not gonna have enough money that we have currently available.
We'll get through Bluebrain with the 49.3 that's currently there. We will get through Bluebrain with the 49.3.
I hope so, but you're gonna be going back, and it won't be to me, because I won't be here, but for some further appropriations. And so I just, and I hope 2 weeks is enough time to get back and sort of quiet some of the concerns and come up the last 2 months. Take the last 2 months.
We have a lot of work to do on Blueprint over the next couple of weeks, and a lot of work to do with, scope and negotiations. So
Yeah.
after a couple of weeks, we should have a clearer picture of where we're at in a variety of areas.
So if you can come back in 2 weeks, that would be great. Cause it's, I know you're working hard on this, but it's a repeat. I mean, there's enough repeat, and hopefully we won't repeat everything, so I'm just, anyways, that's just.
I don't wanna give you more work. What I want, and I know you guys are working your butts off, and you started behind the curve, and there's a lot that's gotta be done. And I think you're making progress, you really do. It's just, we're fearful, because we've seen some of the stuff. I know you guys haven't necessarily seen it before, but, I hope you take the input in the manner to which it was given, and that is to stave off some of the dire consequences that some of the stuff we bring. I know we don't have the resources, staffing resources committed to it that we probably should have in some respects. And I know that we're at tax time, close out time. So you've got a lot to do. One of these days I'd ask the different point percents will very nice schedule and just everything's great.
Well, the functional team was actually here, so they heard the last part of your.
What are you guys doing here? Get to work. Anyway. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you for your time.
We're gonna have to stop having this meeting so you guys can.